Really, we are so blessed here because today our speaker is Susanna, and she is a real, for honest to goodness, expert in this kind of public engagement work. So my day gig is at the David Suzuki Foundation, and you know, one of the very first people my boss called up when he said, like, find out about this crazy newfangled public engagement stuff. You were one of the first calls, and we were all super jazzed to have her there. And like we're all like saying like, okay, how do we do these hard things she's actually like got us excited about? So we curse you and love you for all of that. She's also been involved in a million things. So she's actually an academic, super smart times over at the UBC. And I believe, insanely, you were also deeply involved with the citizens voting. What was that thing called right before I came to Vancouver?
Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform.
That thing, the name I cannot remember. But it's like this was like this really impressive thing which they still talk about in the world of like electoral reform. It's like how do we build these citizen movements and actually like get people who aren't the experts talking and being smart. So clearly you've discovered I'm not so smart, so I'm going to bring in someone who actually knows what she's talking about. So hooray, Susanna, give it up.
Thanks, Eli, and thanks everybody for coming. So a little bit, Eli was using the words public participation, and just to give us some context, what that means in terms of my own work is involving citizens in the decisions that affect their lives. And most of my work is with governments or large organizations who want to create more responsive policy. And so that's the frame that I'm coming at it with. But because Net Tuesday is a lot about helping nonprofits do their work better, so I'm going to be spending about half the time talking about advocacy and the other half of the time talking about government-sponsored engagement efforts, and all of the time talking about Facebook in particular. And we could have this conversation about any one of a million different social media channels, but Facebook is the one I happen to be doing my research in right now. And I think it's worthwhile for us to dig in a little bit deeper into one particular media, particularly, as you'll see I'm talking about, it's the second most popular website in the entire world. And so it's worth us paying a bit of attention to it. So this is me. If you're tweeting, I'm at Susanna Lyons, and it's my website and my email address, and I welcome you to be in touch at any point. So Facebook. Why Facebook? Well, half of all of Canada is on Facebook. That is 17 million people are on Facebook in Canada. In the United States, 38% of the country is on Facebook. And we spend about 7 hours a month on this social network. So that's a lot of people and a lot of time, which means that's a really great resource that we have if we're trying to build a better world, if we're trying to make things happen, if we're trying to sell gadgets, whatever it is. This is a very important group of people to be focusing on. And we're looking at is, can Facebook help us build a stronger society? And as I mentioned, I'm going to be looking at both activism and participation in government. And so when I talk about activism, I'm meaning anything that we do to help make the world more environmentally, socially, economically, you name it, just. And these can be both behaviors that are, what was the word I was going to use? Disruptive and non-disruptive behaviors. So non-disruptive behaviors might be things about just kind of raising awareness and asking people to write letters, getting involved in political campaigns, things that are sort of along with the dominant system, but just trying to shift course a little bit. And they can also be disruptive behaviors, doing protests, doing boycotts, which is like using your economic power to change things. And it may be focused on changing the existing organizations or political institutions, but it could also be about trying to change individuals and trying to convince them to make their behaviors different. So that's what I'm kind of coming from when I'm talking about activism. It's not just people standing in the streets. There's a whole bunch of things that can fall under that window, and as you'll see, we'll talk about that in a minute. And then participation in government. So, you know, they used to call the way we saw government the kind of the vending machine paradigm, where we'd come, put in our coin, and press a button and wait for something to come out at us. And after a while, we started to get a little annoyed at it, so we grabbed the vending machine, we shake it and tilt it. And then they started to change that into government as a service. So you'd come to your government, and they'd say, what can I do for you? And you'd say, I want a XY. And they do that. And again, sort of a passive relationship. But in today's society, where our problems are way more complex. There are no problems that we're facing that can just be solved with one sector alone. Whether it's homelessness, climate change, any one of these issues. It's government, it's civil society, it's business, it's everybody coming together. So in this way, the idea of government as providing the service starts to change. And also, they're working within a much more limited atmosphere. And so the idea that citizens are partners with government is kind of underlying our new approach to government. And that's what basically motivates my work, which is we can create stronger societies by having citizens as an integral shaper of what governments do. So we'll start with activism and looking at what can Facebook do to advance activism. And I have a study here, Idealware, which if you are somebody who uses social media tools in your workplace, you want to visit Idealware. They have a nice little report that just came out talking about different social media items. And they did a study recently, this is kind of hard to read, but in their study they found out that out of all the nonprofits that have Facebook, over 70% of them, 72% of them, saw that they had increased website traffic by being on Facebook. And that's one of the things we want, right? We want to send people to our websites. Then they also found that there were 67% were finding that Facebook is helping move people to action. Again, a very important aspect of our work. And then just about 42% had an increased email list size, and 30% were getting more donations. So you can see here some very real statistics about people finding Facebook to be useful. So I'm actually interested in your own understandings and experiences of using Facebook. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbor or in groups of 3, whatever's comfortable for you, to answer this question, which is what is one example of activism on Facebook that stands out to you and why? And as I said, activism can be defined in so many different ways, but it's anything that's an active effort to try to make the world, quote-unquote, a better place. And so I'm going to be talking shortly about some examples about mobilization, which means getting people to do stuff, organizing, which means helping people coordinate their activities. For example, that the Net Tuesday thing, that's an organizing effort, the fact that there are chapters all around the world doing similar kinds of stuff. Getting people on board, and lastly, raising some money. And there's a variety of other things we could talk about, but those are 4 I'm just going to point to today. So I'd like you, in a moment, to turn to the person sitting beside you, introduce yourself, and choose just one example of something you've seen on Facebook that stood out to you, and why did it do that? And this is purposefully vague, so you can talk about a very good example, or you can talk about a terrible example, whatever stands out to you. Okay, so you have just about 3 or 4 minutes. Turn to the person beside you, and please take a crack at this question.
Chad. Nice to meet you, Emmer. You want to join us? Okay. Chad. I had like lost years ago. Cheaper thing to lose my phone, I guess, right? Alright, so
Can I join you?
by all means. Alright, one more time. Ellen? Emmerich? Chad? Hatchie? The question is, one thing on Facebook for activism. Anything jumping to mind on that? November now. Last year I had a buddy that did the whole November grows never mustache. So every day on Facebook was a new profile picture of it looking worse and worse and worse. Right? It was like, yeah, kind of like a daily photo vlog, right? He did quite well. A lot of people, you know, I'll pay you $10 to see you continue this terrible experiment along, right? So,
November's already taken me $25 then it's November 1st.
Yeah, now it's hard, right? Which terrible mustache are you going to sponsor, right? There's a lot of people doing it.
But that's clever. The one that the person that got the most, the biggest donation from me is a woman who just decided to participate in the So she posted on Facebook that she is going to wear a fake mustache for 4 hours every day.
Oh, really?
And if you gave her a donation of a specific amount, she would wear a mustache of your choice. So I could pick which mustache she's going to wear.
Oh, okay. It's a low user engagement sort of thing, eh?
So you're about halfway through. You haven't heard from the other person. Please switch.
Yeah, so like, it's really cool on Facebook right now, because I find there's sort of before Facebook was chatting with friends or like updates, breakdowns, a lot more of the online platform for sharing for fun. With so more recently, video was really inspiring this being part of that it's a great story. I kind of inspired on it. It's like I posted it, my friend it's all went viral. And all of that matter yeah. And the fact that it's wide, it's widely
started using it in that way, and so well, I'm just trying to think. I run an office and I use Facebook all the time for fundraising to come to my office. Personal, but I think I just had an event on October 23rd, and I probably sold half our tickets on Facebook.
Oh, really?
The other half were through our board connections. Word of mouth on yeah, I do a lot of share photos with the events that we're having.
Okay, you want to just finish up what you're saying?
Hey, no worries.
And I'd like to invite your attention back to the front of the room. Well, that was a very lively conversation. It sounds like there was a lot of neat stuff being exchanged. I'm curious, I'd like to hear just a couple things from what people talked about. Would anybody like to share either what they or their discussion partner talked about in terms of an example that stands out? Please, and speak up nice and loud.
Sure, my name's Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
One of the ones that stands out for me is Covenant House here in Vancouver, where it's not so much that they're using Facebook exclusively, but they're using Facebook as a reinforcer for all of the other messages that they're doing, and so it becomes just part of that sort of mobilization package, where they're laying the groundwork so that when you see an ad later on, certain themes echo really nicely. And one of the valuable things, about Facebook, certainly in my work with Facebook, is that it gets around a certain filter that people have, because Facebook is part of your daily life, it's part of your casual life, not part of your filtered life. You don't filter on Facebook. And so Covenant House can sneak in those messages into your daily life that are passing by in your newsfeed, and then reinforces them later. They see some really successful results, and I think that that's really neat.
Awesome. So the particular tool you're talking about is the use of status updates through their fan page.
That's exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Other examples of things that stand out to you? You can just share what you talked about. It doesn't have to be something new.
The news spreads even more now than ever, I find. So I was saying there's sort of a shift at the moment, whereas before it was more just like friends updates and what friends are doing. Now it's more like sharing news and information, and that more important information, where we would use other mediums in the past, and now it seems that Facebook is becoming sort of a new medium, to a more bigger medium to really express ourselves.
Yeah.
What's something you learned on Facebook?
Huh? Like
What?
what's like a newsy thing that you learned on Facebook that was like, huh, I got that from Facebook? What?
Yeah, I mean,
And so he's asking for examples. Is there any examples you have of something you might have learned?
sure.
Particularly?
I mean, I'm registered for. I'm following like good. I'm following other different news sources that you can check off for Facebook now. There's also a lot of inspiring videos which come out quite a lot from all your friends. So they're saying this happens every day, but there's inspiring videos that one friend posts, and it's within a day or two, literally it spreads. It becomes viral so quickly. And in fact, everyone uses Facebook. It's just the best way to spread.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Any other examples, please? Right.
For us, the inspiring videos were of people fighting to overthrow the dictatorships and really hated governments in countries from Egypt to Syria and to others which I think had less Facebook users. And I don't know the extent to which Facebook was over-credited with being an enabler of the communication among people who wanted to put an end to those dictatorships. But certainly, at least among the middle class players of these countries, maybe those going to university who had parents who bought them smartphones or computers so that they could have internet access, as opposed to the majority of people who probably were quite poor and had no Facebook or even computer or smartphone access. So that it definitely played an important role, which I think is increasing even in North America. One thing that comes to mind, and I think I'll end on this, is that in protests against capitalism in North America earlier this year, this is before the anti-Wall Street movement, people that in the face of police brutality and police attacks against their right to voice dissent against the government and protest, they were using Twitter, maybe through their Facebook accounts, I don't know, to say that on your way to protest, avoid this intersection because a lot of cops are waiting to grab you there.
Right, real-time communication. Awesome, those are lots of great examples. Thank you. Okay, one more. Anybody want to jump in?
Well, I'll just say, I mean, kind of following up, the Occupy movements, I mean, almost next to real time that, tear gas in Phoenix, arrests and rubber bullets in Oakland and in Dallas and Vancouver, and like, actually I think today, one of the debates, or on the town hall, the government in Vancouver said, well, Facebook reports that anytime police try to crack down, there's violence and arrests, and I mean, that's how we're spreading the word. The media, especially in the United States, is doing it. So Facebook and is another form of media.
Yeah.
And I mean, in terms of what type of news I get, less so with Facebook, but I get 90% of my news either through Facebook or Twitter. So I mean, that's basically how I learn about most things these days.
Okay, awesome. So we heard some examples of organizations reinforcing their messages in Facebook. We heard about getting exposed to ideas that we might not have heard before, about social media as an organizing tool and actually being able to enable people to communicate with each other, and how to actually reproduce or have a parallel news source. And so Facebook is playing a lot of different roles for us as we think about how to advance the world that we want to see. So here's some examples that I pulled out, but there's a million of different ways in which, we'll start with mobilization, that organizations are using Facebook to make a difference. So in terms of mobilizing, this is one of the best examples of a nonprofit's presence on Facebook. This is the Humane Society of America. They have a huge following, 45,000 people, and they're just very, very smart at having good landing pages, so different campaigns. They'll have a landing page that'll draw you to action about doing nice updates, and they have a very, very active constituency. 1,300 people are talking about this, which means that they're mentioning the Humane Society in their posts. So here's a nice example of the Humane Society using Facebook as a place to coordinate policy advancement. So they're asking people to to sign a petition to the EU around animal tested cosmetics. Very, very simple form. This is really important when we're asking people to do things on Facebook. They often have a low attention span. And so very simple, your first name, last name, email, and country. One of the nice things also about this is that they probably could have an application where they draw in your personal information, and so that stuff would all get filled out for you. But instead, they're using this up as an opportunity for people to kind of feel like they're opting in, and the more kind of this kind of an action makes people feel like I've done something, and that's a kind of a mutual benefit relationship that's really at the heart of when things work on Facebook. It's because I'm getting something from you, and you're getting something from me. A Canadian example, this is Open the Media, and it's last year we had, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, there was an advancement to have our internet use metered, meaning the more we downloaded, the more we would pay. And people like us said, what? I live on the internet, you can't do that to us. And so Open the Media did on a lot of different platforms, but including Facebook. And so you could sign the petition, and they ended up getting 12.7 thousand people liking it and over 100 people sharing it. But the reason I'm pulling up this in particular is I just took the screenshot yesterday, and this is the last post on this wall is the 27th of October this year. You know, this is a petition that's over a year old, and people are still coming to this page. So so they built a constituency. They made a huge impact on the government. The government said, "Wow, that's a lot of people who are asking us to do something different," and people are still coming back. Here's a third example. This one is also a couple years old, but it stands out because it's a very large corporation against a very large nonprofit organization. Greenpeace. It was targeting Nestle for how they were sourcing their palm oil, and they were attesting to that the palm oil was coming from forests that were being cut down and endangering. I want to say gorillas. I hope I'm not getting that. The animal world, large ape of some kind, and so they came up with a very graphic video. You can see an image of this in the corner where some guy's at work, he's really bored, he opens up a Kit Kat package, and it's actually in the package are gorilla fingers, and he breaks them off, and he takes one of the gorilla fingers and he starts chewing on it in his office, and like people are like staring at him in horror as blood is spurting out of his mouth, and he's just nonchalantly wiping the blood off and continuing to eat his Kit Kat. And so obviously very shocked, but it went quite viral. And so Nestle did a couple of things very wrong. First of all, they said to YouTube, take down the video. Instead of coming up with their own retort video that they would post anywhere the Nestle video or the Greenpeace video was, they asked YouTube to take it down, which caused an uproar. And so people said, you know, I might not have ever seen this video except for your media people are goofs, and now it's everywhere. But the Facebook part that I'll focus on today is, so in order to participate in the conversation on the wall, you need to be a fan. So tons of people became Nestle fans and started making comments like, you know, I think I'm condemning Nestle for their disgusting behavior, that more than 1,000 orangutans have been affected by the destruction of the rainforest. I'm no longer going to buy Nestle materials, those kinds of things. So this conversation started happening, and then the response from Nestle was actually very, very poor. That they not only were taking down the video as an example, but here on Facebook, they were using sarcasm. Thanks for the lesson in manners, they say, and then consider yourself embraced, because somebody was complaining that Nestle wasn't listening to them. But it's our page, and thus we set the rules, and it's always been that way. And so you can see here, this is how not to respond. The idea is to be human, and all of us are doing activities that are worthy of critique, because you know, if we got it right, then the world would be a different place. But we're all needing to learn from each other. And so instead of Nestle kind of going, wow, thanks for the feedback, let's talk about this, they really pushed hard, and their brand suffered for it. Arrogance. Exactly. It was a very good example of arrogance. And then the last example here in terms of activism using in Facebook are these things called letter bombs. And you may be familiar with this, but this is the idea that you'll coordinate a group of people, and everybody will change their Facebook profile to a letter, and then you'll plan on exactly when you're going to post on the wall. And so I will post at 11:52 and 43 seconds. You'll post at 11:53 and 45 seconds. It's helpful if everybody's in the same room and you can line up in a row and you can kind of go, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and everybody posts. And then you get things that say DKNY. DK is a bunny butcherer because they were using fur. Or Sarah Palin is, keep the fear alive. And then you can repeat this, so you can kind of go through cycles, because this will only stay up on the front page as long as there are no other posts. But it's a fun thing that you can do. So that's some examples of mobilizing in Facebook. So some examples of organizing in Facebook are things that I think we'll all be familiar with, but these are some good examples. Lead Now, a great local organization and Canadian organization, they did these vote bombs and rallying the vote for the last federal election. And so they used an event. So they had over 1,000 people attending. They had reached out to 12,000 people. So 12,000 people got this message in their, however they receive their Facebook messages, whether it's in their inbox or when they come to Facebook. And so events are a fabulous, fabulous tool. And I recommend if you're on Facebook and you have an organization, use events as often as you can, both for things that you're trying to drive people's attention to in the real world, but also just online, because you can communicate with lots of people. It's really easy for other people to invite their friends and networks. And it's kind of, it's a very clear and focused interaction on Facebook, and people don't need to commit to the long term in order to be a part of it. And it's a nice way to communicate leading up to the event. So that was a Lead Now using the events tool. This is a picture of Chile. So right now, since early summer or late spring, they've been doing these protests around trying to get education for free. It was free at one point, but then in the economic changes, they started to privatize schooling. And the seniors in a lot of the schools started saying, this is actually, this isn't the society we want, and you should be giving us free schooling, and they start to take over the schools. So right now in Chile, there are dozens of schools that are being, that have been taken over by young people, and under some strange loophole in the law, the government actually has to feed kids while they're at school, even if they've taken over the school. And so they're getting supplies, and what I've heard from it is that it's quite very well organized, somewhat kind of hierarchically oriented organization, but they're doing very, very good still months later. So this is one part of that protest. This was a kiss-a-thon outside of the government building. But the reason I bring this one up is because they are using Facebook chat as a real-time updating tool. So, and there'll be some folks sort of maybe in the neighborhood or close to the edge of the periphery of one of the schools that's been taken over, and they'll chat on Facebook saying, the police are coming, and then the students who have taken over the school will mobilize and get ready for response. And so they're doing a very real-time communication with each other through Facebook. This one is just screenshots of some of the worldwide Occupy protest pages, and this is a great way for people to connect with the latest news, to organize as a hub for events, those kind of things. I won't spend too much time on this because I think everybody's familiar with it, but just as an example of how to have one central effort that then gets turned into localized representations on Facebook. So recruiting. So you've got, you're asking people to do fun things, you're giving people a chance to help organize and communicate with each other. So how do you get people involved? Well, 350.org, they're masters at using social media to do things. They've got a sign up to build their email list. This is the landing page that they have, and they're just asking for some very basic information. And then they're actually going to email you. And while social media is highly popular and deeply embedded, email is still king in terms of communicating with people of a certain age group, 25 and older, that email is still the best way to get in front of people. I mean, you have a lot of competition, but people deal with their email every day. When you're working particularly with a constituency that's 25 and under, that's different. They're not using email as much. They are using Facebook or other kind of social media tools as their primary communications mechanism. So you have to think about who your audience is. Another way to recruit people, this is the Lance Armstrong Live Strong. This is another great example of an organization. They work on cancer prevention and responses. And so all of their social media stuff is worth checking out. But on Facebook, you can see here, they're asking people to kind of get active in the organization by pledging. But really what this is for the organization is a chance to build their email list. So it's a nice kind of way to hide to hide the let's get in contact with you behind let me give you an opportunity to feel good because you're doing something. And then our fundraising, so you can use the causes tool, which is the Facebook's formal partnership to raise funds. And there's all sorts of ways of doing this. For example, on your birthday, you can invite your friends to give money to a cause that you've selected, or you can embed it into a variety of other mechanisms. So this is an example of World Child Canada, and you can see how much they've raised and how many people are a member of their cause, almost 3,000. And people aren't giving a lot. These are a lot of $10 pledges that they've paid, but a couple people have given over 100. So that's in Facebook, what you can expect is lots of small donations, anywhere like $2, $5, $10.
Does Facebook take a cut of donations raised there?
Not as far as I know, but that's a very good question. I haven't run a campaign in 2 years, so I don't know.
So I could actually give a real quick answer to that one. So my understanding is currently for like the last year, Causes has actually not been available to Canadian nonprofits because they have used, what are they called? Sorry, no, there's a service that's called,
PayPal?
No, sorry, it's Canada Helps. So they use Canada Helps as the donation provider. So Canada Helps, I think, takes a percent. It's a very low percentage. But unfortunately, because they're in a bit of a dispute at the moment, that's not a tool that's currently available, but may well come back soon.
Good to know. Thank you.
You have to be a registered charity.
You have to be a registered charity?
To be a nonprofit, you have to be a federally registered charity. I don't know if that would affect.
Yeah. So I don't know if you all heard that, but in order to use Canada Helps, you have to be a registered charity. You can't just be a nonprofit. So you have to go through some of the legalized aspects of it. So you have to find the right mechanism for actually gathering your money, but some of the methods in which you might do that are things like click to like. So this is a Canadian organization, We Day, and they're giving an incentive. They're basically building their fan base, but also raising some money by, if you click, we get $1 from our donators. Another kind of way to incentivize giving money is the very typical fundraising tactic of matching donors, matching your donation, what they're calling here doubling. And so this is Women for Women International. If you donate today, then you can see the effect that they're promising in terms of the donation. And if you're working on fundraising, and some of you might be, because we're nearing towards the end of the year when often there's a push for fundraising, this is such an important mechanism of getting people the opportunity to give some money, and in the idea that their money is going to be multiplied in some way by others. It gives them a sense of, okay, now I should do it now. So it's a good incentive. So that's just a very quick kind of overview of some examples of people using Facebook to do activism. I'll end this one section here about pointing you to some essential resources for people in the nonprofit world. So this is facebook.com/nonprofits. They've got a page that highlights some of the best, or highlights some of their kind of high-profile nonprofit efforts, and it also gives some tips once in a while. But you'll see things like, right now there was a lot of talk about a partnership with the federal U.S. government around job development and stuff like that. So it's quite mainstream, but useful to keep an eye on. Secondly, BethCantor.org is a great place to go, actually for social media in general, but she knows a heck of a lot about Facebook as well. And she's actually just written a book about using social media for nonprofits that I recommend very much. And I'll make these slides available also that Eli can post them, so you can scribble this down now, but also you'll get it later. This is another very important thinker and doer and trainer in the social media world. This is Heather Mansfield, and her blog is nonprofitorgs.wordpress.com. She's on Facebook as well. Also super uber smart and leads some really great trainings that I recommend. And then the last thing is, now this could be a number of places, but I happen to like movements.org, how to organize on Facebook securely. And this is a really important piece as we're starting to think about the Occupy movement and the revolutions and the Arab Spring, where we're actually really challenging power. And it's not just, you know, hey, we think you should, you know, use less chemicals in your processing. We're actually saying you should not have power anymore. You should not have money anymore because your incentives are not commensurate with the world we want. Well, that actually starts to challenge people in some ways that may be potentially dangerous in a variety of ways. Whether in Canada, we're lucky that we live in a society where we don't get a lot of sense of, well, you might be thrown into jail if you do something. But we saw a lot of that happening in the Arab Spring. For example, one of the governments organized an event on Facebook and changed the date at the last minute, and had everybody who ended up showing up, they arrested because they used it as a tool to kind of say, you're revolutionary and we don't support that. So here, this website, and you can search for others, some very important tools about how to stay safe if you are doing more radical behaviors. So that's it about activism. I'll pause for a second and ask if there are any questions or comments or some thoughts that might have come up as you heard this stuff.
Just on your last point about the threats to activists using this media, I can't remember who, but it was the WikiLeaks guy that commented that Facebook was the best spy tool or something like that that could be developed to spy on activists or spy on anyone. Because, of course, governments, including most notably the U.S. government, have complete access to all forms of communication. But the Canadian government similarly is pushing for similar or identical access.
Yeah, so very good point. Just to kind of be aware that I think the umbrella to that comment is we treat Facebook like it's a public space, like we own it, and that we're safe there. But it actually very much is a private space that's motivated by profit and is responsive to legislation, including opening up accounts. So doesn't mean by any means that we shouldn't be there, but we should think about the kinds of things we're posting and the kinds of organizing we're doing there. And then also for governments, as I work with them, to think about themselves, is this an appropriate place for you to be, where it's a commercial enterprise and its orientation is towards making money? Is that appropriate for governments to be there? So it's a good question to really think through what is appropriate for Facebook and what isn't. But what I can say is that we do need to be there. We just need to figure out how to be there best according to your aims. And the reason we need to be there is back to the statistic that 50% of Canadians are active on Facebook or have an account. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about something you said when you were talking about Rally the Vote, Lead Now, the Facebook page. You mentioned one of the functions, and you said one of the great things about it is that people don't need to commit to it long term. And the question that came up in my head right away is that something that's actually desirable? So maybe you could just elaborate on what you meant by that.
Right. Good question. So what I meant by that is that for individuals, they can say, oh yeah, maybe I'll come and check it out without needing to become a fan of your page. And that's useful for people who are still kind of testing the waters. You have sort of your core supporters, you've got people who are signed up but don't actually do anything. And then you've got the people on the periphery that may be aligned in terms of their orientation, but not actually willing to join you. And so an event is that kind of sort of middle step where it's like, oh yeah, I'm considering to go to the event and I don't have to actually join Lead Now, but I might actually after I hear some of the updates.
The opportunity to test the waters.
Yes.
Engaging people sort of preliminarily.
Yeah. And you can continue to send out messages to anybody who's replied maybe or yes, or hasn't replied. Those three statuses can receive messages from you. Once you've said no, you don't receive messages anymore. Yeah. Is there one more? No. Okay. So then I'll talk a little bit about participation in government and some of the research I've been doing with the city. So Gov 2.0 is the framework that I'm working from, and this is basically the idea that about governments being responsive and using technology as an opportunity to have interactive conversations with the public. And these are the 4 principles of Gov 2.0: being more transparent, basically that's open data, more collaborative, which means different agencies working together and different sectors working together, innovating, coming up with brand new ways to solve some of the problems, and then participation, which is the thing I'm interested in. So the reason why I'm interested in participation is because we have such an amazing resource with the, there are so many people who have on the ground real lived experience that can help shape better policy. And this is the basic idea behind public participation, is that we can actually end up with better solutions and stronger implementation if we tap into the public understanding and skills and passion. So governments around the world are starting to use Facebook as a place to have participation, including the city of Vancouver and their Talk Green campaign. So they used Facebook particularly, since we're talking about that, in a really active way. They have almost 3,000 followers. There are people talking about it, not too many at the moment. And they have lots of interaction. So that here they're posting videos. And during the actual development of the Greenest City plans, they had lots of likes and comments, and they were having real conversation. They were posting ideas, individuals were posting ideas and responding back and forth. So they did a very good job in actually creating a community that felt like they were being listened to, because they had somebody who was on staff, present to the Facebook page every day and on the weekends as well. So if you're thinking about doing a Facebook page, regardless of who you are, it has to be outside of just regular business hours, because that's when we use Facebook, is outside of regular business hours. It's just part of our everyday life. They also did a bunch of other really neat things that you might be familiar with. That they were on Twitter, and they were on YouTube, and they were on Flickr, and they held face-to-face events that sometimes engaged with the online stuff, where they had small meetings, big meetings, the Pechakucha kickoff, that was 2,000 people. And then, of course, they did this crowdstorming thing, where they invited people to get together and ask them for their ideas. What would you do to green the city? So they did a nice variety of different stuff. Some of the other ways that governments have been using Facebook are, this is a really neat example of, during the H1N1 flu epidemic, the Public Health Agency of Canada put together an application for people to learn about H1N1. So this was their landing page, this is their fan page on Facebook. And then they had this opportunity where they had a prepared status update. This is a very simple tool, really easy to use if you're on Facebook, to have update your status. You click on a button and it seeds it for you, and so then people don't have to think about what to write. They can just update it and it goes out to their networks, so you get that amplification effect. And so their seeded message was, I got the vaccine because blah blah blah. The other thing they did was they had this quiz book, where it's sort of a game. I mean, it's quite static, very safe, Government of Canada kind of thing, where you learn a bit of information and then you do a poll, and learn a bit of information and do a poll. But they had this way of kind of getting some interactive learning and trying to address some of the myths that were circulating. Another example of using Facebook in a really innovative way, this is Iceland. I don't know if anybody's heard about this, but Iceland is redrafting their constitution, relying on social media and a group of representative citizens who are working through some of the issues. So this small group was meeting face-to-face, but then they'd go into Facebook and they ask people for their thoughts and reflections, and they do this in other social media channels as well. And then they end up crafting a recommendation to change the constitution of the country based on some of these conversations, which then went to the president. And I think they're actually making a decision on it. If it wasn't last week, then the next week coming up. So the only problem is that social media is so new, we're not yet sure what works and what doesn't. What are the do's and what are the don'ts? And in some ways that's a good thing, because it's developing a culture of innovation and testing things out and not being afraid to fail. On the other hand, you want to be able to kind of get a sense of, well, what does work? So in response to that question, at the University of British Columbia, I'm in the sustainability department, and so I worked with the Transportation 2040 team to take a next step from the Greenest City Conversations and build a transportation plan that responds to citizen priorities. And so we held this event called Exploring Vancouver's Transportation Future, which was in Facebook. And I was asking 4 questions. Who participates? Who would show up to a Facebook event? What do they say about transportation, importantly, to be able to help shape policy? How do they participate? Are people actually talking with each other? Is it just sort of a series of monologues? Are they deliberating? Are they telling stories? And then lastly, trying to figure out, should government be using Facebook as a site of civic engagement? And you can probably get a sense from what I've been saying so far is that the answer is yes, and with some caveats. So a little bit about the project. There were 535 participants, mostly from around the Lower Mainland, not just in Vancouver, which is appropriate because there are lots of commuters. So basically they went through a number of steps. The first thing they did is they would register, and I'd ask them some basic demographic questions, and then they'd get assigned to a small discussion group. From there, in their small discussion groups, they'd go through an experience of telling stories. How do you get around the city? What works and what doesn't? Work about it. Learning some of the issues and the background context so that people aren't just coming at their recommendations from, I don't like waiting on the bus, but are actually from, well, these are the trends and these are the issues and here's some of the context to be thinking about, so that they're actually giving informed recommendations. Then they generate some ideas together, they would select their top ideas, and then share those top ideas in a public forum and get some feedback on those. We'd all close up with a closing survey so I could kind of get a sense of what did people learn, what did people think. So those were the steps. And this is what it looked like. This was the app landing page. And you can see the idea was we're asking people, do you want a better commute? So do we. Let's work together on this. And for 3 very simple steps, they were being invited in to discuss, propose, and promote. And this is, I mentioned this before, but we need to be able to create simple tasks for people to do in Facebook because often they're just spending, short bits of time, and yet I was asking them to participate in a fairly complex discussion and come back. And so that's what I was trying to test. Are people willing to have in-depth and serious conversations in a place where we normally talk about cats and look at funny photos, So the answer is yes, but not everybody. And so one of the major recommendations that I came out with is that, and I kind of knew this going in, but limited time and money, is that you need to have activity options for people at all levels of commitment. So people who can come in and just click a button and that was their participation. People who can come in and comment on something and leave. And people who can come in and add an in-depth idea and build on it and come back many times. So kind of really thinking through gradients. That's one of the key messages to take away if you're thinking about an in-depth engagement. So after they signed up, I'd ask them to add the app. And this was important because I needed to be able to get their name and their email address. And that to be able to post status updates. Now I got some bounces from this. I got about 200 bounces from out of 700 people who signed up, and that's not an absurdly high number. What I learned anecdotally from this is that people who said no to adding the app at first would have liked to. Basically, they were like, "Why do you want my information?" So my recommendation is, if you have add an app, when you click on Don't Allow, have a pop-up screen that says, just so you know, this is what we're going to do with your information, this is why we're asking you for it, and so that people can get a very clear understanding of it, and then they can still make their choice. But people would be more likely to kind of say, oh, okay, I'm willing to add the app now that I understand your motivations and your terms of use.
Didn't you want to head off the possibility that people might just hit the X at the top right of the screen instead of, by closing the screen completely, that window completely, instead of going for the Don't Allow? So that shouldn't there be some information, maybe not as much as on the page they're going to be taken to if they hit the Don't Allow, but shouldn't there be something here that letting them know what information they're sharing and why? Okay, it does say why.
Yeah, and this is also a generic add an app page. I don't know how much you could change this, and also you don't want to give people too much information because many people are used to adding apps, and so you don't want to confuse them. You want to kind of channel them to taking the decision you want them to make. But if they're going to say no, then to add more. But you could do some testing with that idea as well. So I mentioned learning, so they got some information, some documentation, they got PDFs, they had links, the facilitators would embed information into the discussions, there was video, that kind of a thing. And then this was what their small discussion looked like. So they had tabs that would open up over the time, and they would do posts and then respond to each other. They could see the team members, and you could click on your team member and see who they are. The access you'd have to the profile would be similar to if anybody else on Facebook. If you were already friends with them, you could see what they allowed to be seen, and if you weren't, you could only see what they were not showing. There's buttons to find out more information and to ask an expert a question. So that's what the small group discussions look like. Then, that's another example of that. And then this is what the public sharing of ideas look like. This is one page down. So one of the ideas that came out of the discussions was to develop car-free spaces by closing specific streets, for example, coming up Commercial Drive. And in the words of the participants, why that recommendation was a good idea. And then here the public talked about what they thought about those ideas. So we did that for all 19 recommendations. I will stop here for a second. Yuri was one of our facilitators of one of the small group dialogues. And I'd like you to just kind of share, one or two thoughts you might have about how the application worked and any insights you had about using Facebook as a place for people to give input onto policy. I don't know if you mind standing up so people can hear you. And by the way, he didn't know I was going to ask him to do this, so please give him
Hi, so I'm Yuri. I was one of Susanna's volunteers who led a discussion group. It was kind of what she was saying about the ability to engage at every level. I think we had about 35 to 40 people in each group, and I would say at about that 35 people, these are people who signed up for the app, asked to be involved, so this was like 700, so these are people who already were quite committed, but even out of all that, I think we probably had 9 or 10 people actually commented. You had a lot of people reading, so you have this kind of pyramid or funnel, I guess, that a lot of people are interested, fewer people will comment, and then even fewer people will actually engage in conversations. So that's why it's important to have the ability to engage at multiple levels. So, and amongst the other facilitators, a lot of people were frustrated. Like, we were trying to engage, and I would ask follow-up questions, and we would promote daily or several times a day. So it was a really active group, but it was really hard to get people, even engaged people, to comment online. So I think, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because we were providing information, and the few people who did comment were also providing information, and everyone was reading it. So a lot of people were still coming to the site. Just because someone doesn't type into their keyboard doesn't mean they're not participating or commenting. Just like this group, you all came out here tonight, but very few of you or any are going to ask a question. Doesn't mean that you're not engaged or involved or interested. It just means that there's different levels of connection. So we have to find ways, and it's still in the learning phases, ways to engage, or ways to count and engage, and tell hosts and city governments and clients that it's okay that we had 1,000 visitors but only have 5 or 50 comments. That ratio is okay, and that means people are still coming and seeing. But that's, I think, a large part of participating is simply showing up. So I guess that's what I kind of learned. And
thank you.
Susanna has other stuff to say.
Yeah, I've got a couple charts and graphs since I'm in UBC. I need to show charts and graphs. You have a question? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So just based on the example you've shown, it just came to me is like, for example, when you have a fan page, and means you have organization or business, right? And you have fans asking questions and comment on things. how do you respond? Like, because when you have organization, it means you have different people will be involved. So let's say when you mentioned the nasty, when they respond in certain ways, I mean, certain organization, they might recognize it. Are they going to come out another voice from the same company and, whatever, just criticize themselves or doing self-critique, whatever? I mean, how did they manage to deal with the response to the fans?
On an ongoing basis, organizations need to have, like especially large organizations, need to have messaging that they're channeling out through various channels, whether it's through the public spokespersons, their company website, their press releases. And that the message can be consistent across all of the venues. It's just that the tone needs to be appropriate for the venue. So the language you use in a press release, you wouldn't use that language in a social media. You can still say the same thing, but just use it in a much more human language. So that idea is consistent in a crisis as well, is that you have key messages that you're repeating regardless of where you are. But in a social, but you just do that in a kind of relaxed venue. In social media, you also have this added layer of interaction. And so the idea there is to actually respond and to have a human voice. And you need to be able to empower the people that are managing your Facebook page to actually engage and respond and say things like, I don't know, I'll get back to you as soon as I can, or that's a really valid point, thanks for bringing it up, we'll work on it. And just, and to be able to kind of use your key messages and a human voice to be responsive. Does that answer your question?
Yes, somewhat.
Yeah.
My question is, when people respond from the organization, because people are people, we all have different moods. Even though we all, make sure we're everybody on the same page, and this is the tone we're going to talk to the public. Sometimes when it comes to individual, it just come off, off track sometimes.
Yep.
And how we can, adjust it by ourselves immediately when we respond to the fans.
So the two things I heard you say was, one is that people have different tones, and I think that that's okay, and that's what social media is. It's human.
From the organization.
Yeah, from the organization. Yeah. And then secondly, what if they go off message? And if you go off message, to come back and be transparent and honest and quick and say, that's actually not what we meant, we apologize if that, didn't come off properly.
Right.
Yeah, so it's human, and so we need to be human. Okay, we can talk more about that too. I'll just go through the rest of these slides and show you a bit about what we found. So this is what people said. These were their recommendations. There were 19 of them that came out of the discussions. And the city responded to all 19 in a written form that then went out to all the participants. So this is very, very good practice, closing the loop. And people are going to spend time with you and give you your effort. We're going to close the loop and say, we heard you. And in this case, we heard you was, here's a document from the city. So we were talking about how many people participated. So one thing I'll say, I don't actually have the numbers yet, but we had a major technical problem that people weren't receiving the emails that we were sending them. And so I haven't done the numbers yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe half or 1/3 of the people who signed up never actually got the reminder emails to show up and talk. And so that was a very, very big technical challenge for us. And so these numbers may need to be adjusted, but if we were going to look at all registered participants, we had 27% who were active, who gave one post or more. Whereas here, you can see Nielsen, and this is the typical pyramid of participation, shows that only 10% of people ever participate online, and 1% are the heavy contributors, where we had at least 7% or 6.5% of people were heavy contributors on this. And so, as Yuri pointed out, people were opting in, and so it makes sense. But, we had 27% participation, which is a fairly incredible thing to happen on the internet when people actually came out. So a little bit about who participated. Well, one of the reasons why we had such high participation is because people spend a lot of time on Facebook. Over half of them visit Facebook several times a day, and 35% visit several times a week. So these were active people, which also tells us that they were more likely to be willing to integrate something else into their Facebook activities. here you can see also, just in general, the blue bars are the people who participated, the red bars are the people in Vancouver who use the internet, and the green bars are US citizens who participate, who use the internet. And you can see that the people who participated in this project were way more likely to do things like post an issue, post online about a government policy, to join a group to try to change policy, to email somebody, to post on a social networking website about issues. So they're very, very active. They're what Pew calls the government online class. It's a Pew 2010 study. One interesting thing to look at here is that the red bar in the center are the Facebook participants aged 25 to 34. And the orange bar at the top is people who attended the face-to-face public meetings with the City of Vancouver who are over 65. And you can see, and the last bar at the bottom is Vancouver Census. So you can see here that the face-to-face meetings, old people were very much more overrepresented than they're in the demographics of the city. And on Facebook, young people, this is 25 to 34, were much more represented than the demographics. So together, if we do both face-to-face and online engagement, we can actually capture most of the demographics of the city and really hear from the city at large. Yeah. So that, and the message there is that, just as we were hearing with the Covenant House thing, is that you don't want to do everything online and you don't want to do everything face-to-face. You really have to be mixing modalities. Participant gender, another interesting thing here is that the City of Vancouver had this sort of poll where you could come and just answer a survey, and men were much more likely than the census data shows to do this website response, whereas women were much more likely to do the Facebook event, which was ongoing, discussion-oriented, whereas the poll was show up once, you don't have to talk to anybody. So you can take from that whatever you will. But again, thinking about different modes for different types of populations. So just coming to the end here, so digital democracy has a number of benefits that we can really get to scale. This was a very limited budget project. I did it at UBC. I had very little cash. And we still managed to touch 700 people and involve over 500. And geography, we were able to get everybody from the region, not just people who were able to show up to a City of Vancouver meeting. The costs are relatively lower. You still have to put a lot of effort into recruitment, but you can do sort of one-time investment, whereas with face-to-face stuff you might have to scale up exponentially. And things like the digital divide, that always comes up in terms of removing democracy online. Are we leaving people behind? And our studies are showing that actually digital divide is no longer about access or not access. And so pretty much everybody can be online. What the digital divide is about is about skills and comfort. And so that's what we need to be thinking about when we're inviting people to come online is, do I know how to use Facebook? Well, yeah, lots of people do. Do I know how to use this application? Maybe not. And privacy, of course, which is, I could talk for a whole hour, so I won't delve too deeply into that one. So some takeaway messages that all of this is experimental, and we need to be taking some risks, which the City of Vancouver has been doing nicely. And we need to plan to learn from our fails, that this is about really thinking through what do we want to learn, what are we testing, and to